repayments are set to restart this fall, and that means those who haven't had to make payments since the pandemic are about to face a tough reality.
A federal court last week blocked the Biden administration from implementing this student loan forgiveness plan.
This critical relief for debtors, we are going to have a wave of default across the country with all of the negative consequences that has for borrowers.
When I graduated from college, I had about $2,000 in my bank account, $26,000 worth of student loans, and for some reason, I really wanted to pay off my student loans by the time I was 26. In hindsight, that goal is a little bit unnecessarily aggressive, but today I am excited to report to you that through my hard work, my skill, my determination, my grit, and mostly my luck, I was able to do it. In July of 2023, Forbes published an article stating that the average student loan borrower had about $28,950 worth of debt. I think that number's too high. I also am not an expert, and I think there are a lot of people out there who are way more qualified to tell you about the death tango that the federal government and private educational institutions are engaged in. At the end of the day, I'm just a dude who had some student loans and feels strongly about the whole thing. In order to pay off my student loans in a little over 4 years, the deck had to be completely stacked in my favor. I'm going to tell you a little bit about those factors, and it's my hope that in doing so, you'll just have a better understanding about just how f***ed up the situation truly is. If you currently have student debt, then maybe you can take a thing or two from my situation, whether it's motivation or tactics. If you are contemplating going into student debt, however, then maybe you can learn some concrete things from my situation, but I will get to that part later in the video. In the meantime, let's jump in.
What's up, guys? It's your boy. Are you trying to get rid of your student loans? Here are 3 easy steps to get rid of your student loans. Step 1, get your interest paused ASAP. You're gonna have to think outside the box on this one. I thought there was a chance that Donald Trump would pause my student loan interest, so I went about developing a super pathogen that would get interest paused. Sure, a few people died along the way, but I think it was worth it.
I graduated from school in June of 2019. As with all federal student loans, I enjoyed a 6-month grace period before any payments came due. I had $26,016.48 worth of student loans, up from the 20 or so thousand I was expecting to graduate with. More on that later. Before we dive in, let's go to Gert in a bathtub to talk about how loans and interest works.
Hey, I'm Garrett, but I'm in a tub. So let's say you have to go to school, but you can't afford it all outright. You have to borrow about $10,000 in order to make school happen. That $10,000 is called your principal. Generally, student loans are expected to be repaid over the course of 10 years. That 10 years is your term. Let's say you have an interest rate of 5.5%, as people who graduate this year would have. That's your interest rate. So when you graduate college, that 5.5% interest rate would kick into effect, and then you would start accruing interest every month on the principal, or $10,000 that you borrowed. You would also have to start making payments 6 months after you graduate. So if my math is correct, you would end up paying about $108 and some amount of change every month for 120 months or 10 years. Some of this money would go towards your principal, some of this money would go towards your interest. At the end of the 10 years, if you make your minimum payment every single month, you will have paid about $10,000 worth of principal and $3,000 worth of interest. That $3,000 is the cost of borrowing money from the government. That isn't to say you can't pay off your student loans faster. If you make a larger payment consistently or semi-consistently on your student loans, you'll probably pay off your student loans before that 10-year term. And in doing so, the total amount of interest that you pay would go down and would be less than $3,000. I hope that helps. Now, let's go back to Sofa Garrett to talk about whatever he was talking about.
Thanks, Tub Gert. Now that you're up to speed, I can tell you a little bit more about my situation. My minimum monthly payment was $270 a month. Fast forward to March 15th, 2020, thanks to a certain novel coronavirus, interest on all student loans was paused. This was huge. That's the government not charging me for borrowing money in the first place. That's like buying tickets from Ticketmaster without all the extra fees tacked on top. For a while, I kept paying my student loans as normal. Then February 2021 rolls around, and 2 factors changed. The first thing that changed was my mindset. I was convinced that the coronavirus wasn't going to go anywhere, and neither was the forbearance. I didn't know if this was true or not, but I was willing to bet on it. Second, Joey Baidusi campaigned on forgiving $10K student loans for everyone, and that motherfucker won. Politics for the common man? Get out of town. So now that I decided that I didn't have to pay, what did I do? I kept paying. Well, not actually. I still took the money, but I just set it aside every month rather than paying it to my loan servicer. My rationale was that if student loans got forgiven, then I'd have the money on hand and I could use it on something that I wanted to use it on, rather than throwing it down the debt dumpster every month. After an emotional roller coaster, the pipe dream that was student debt forgiveness remained exactly that, a pipe dream. But the 40+ interest-free months ended up being huge for me. Firstly, I was able to pay off the interest that had accrued while I was a student. Tubgert didn't mention this, but unfortunately, interest starts accruing the moment the loans are issued, not when you actually graduate. So if you get loans to go to freshman year of college, they have 4 years to accumulate interest, the loans that you get when you're a sophomore, 3 years, and so on. But I digress. So if I had paid the minimum amount due over the course of the 10 years of the term of the loan, I would have ended up paying about $6,400 worth of interest. Compare that to the $1,162.55 I did end up paying in interest, and I ended up saving about $5,000 worth of interest. I say interest a lot in that sentence. The interest pause also had some less direct benefits too. It allowed me to take some of the money that I'd been setting aside for student loans and make some short-term investments. I don't know if you remember this, but during the pandemic, I-bonds, inflation-linked bonds, were popping off with interest. At one point, they almost hit 10%. So I took some of the money that I'd saved up for student loans and put it in there. I also was able to think of the money I had set aside for student loans as like a extra emergency fund on top of the emergency fund I already had, which gave me some peace of mind during a really stressful time. I've kind of blacked out a lot of the pandemic, and I think a lot of us have, and I think there's going to be some really interesting studies about that in 20 or so years. Main point, I saved about $5,000 on my student loans, and all it took was an unprecedented pandemic that killed millions of people. Tip number 2, you're going to need to get your overhead down super fast. So what I like to do is called box flipping. I go to a container store and I sleep in a different box every single night. Some nights I sleep in 2 boxes. If you subscribe to my big boy course for just $99 a month, I will teach you all of my box flipping tricks. The next area where I lucked out was in the housing department. In an era of soaring interest rates, teardown selling for millions of dollars, and skyrocketing rent, I found myself paying 40% below market rate in my area. I live in the state of Wyoming, and you know, I wouldn't fault you if you thought that living in Wyoming was cheap, because anywhere else in the state that would be true. Jackson Hole, however, saw how bad housing was in the rest of the country and took that as a personal challenge. In the year of our Lord, 2023, it is not uncommon to pay $1,200 to $1,400 a month for a room you share in a house with a shared bathroom, shared parking spots, split amongst 5 people, in a town that doesn't allow overnight street parking for 8 months out of the year. There's a lot more to be said on the topic of housing in Jackson specifically, but that would be enough for another video, so I'm going to leave that out for now. Just know that this is important context when I tell you how much I pay in rent. When I first moved to Jackson in June of 2019, I was paying about $1,100 a month for my room. I then started interning for this cool company, which led to a cool job with the cool company, and then that ultimately led to employee housing, which brought my rent down to about $630 a month. I could now categorically afford my student loans way more than when I had been paying for $1,100 a month in rent. It was around this time that I committed mentally to putting the difference between my rents, or about $400 a month, towards my student loans. This didn't last long as the student loan interest pause kicked in shortly thereafter, or about 2.5 months later, but the key takeaway is this: I could now afford my student loans way more than any of my friends who had loans and were renting at a market rate. There are some downsides to having your job tied to your housing. I don't want to sound like I'm complaining, but I do think it is worth mentioning that I personally don't think that it should be on the employer to fix the housing crisis, just as I don't think it should be on the employer to provide healthcare. I think having your job tied to both of these factors ends up stagnating cross-pollination and raising the stakes to getting a new job in a way that ultimately hurts both the employee and the employer. I have a lot more thoughts on what an employer should and shouldn't be responsible for, but I'll save that for another time. For now, I want the key takeaway to be this: I could not have afforded to pay off my student loans nearly as quickly as I did if not for my employee housing, and that is a privilege that many people in my generation do not get to enjoy. I don't think that's fair. Tip number 3, you gotta pay off your entire principal ASAP. What's the quickest way to do that? Play the lottery. Sure, you may have heard of Dogecoin and GameStop, but I'm out here trying to find the next glitch in the matrix that's gonna get me rich quick. If you follow me, I'm going to show you all of my glitches, and we're going to get rich together. Remember, you can't win if you don't play. God, hate that. I got lucky in a lot of ways, not just my housing, not just the student loan pause, but I was fortunate enough to have parents who saved up for college for my sister and I. I had a math teacher in high school who had us do a student loan project in which we calculated the cost of going to a private, public, and state school and compared how many loans we'd have to take out, what our minimum payment was, and how long it would take to pay off those student loans. I got lucky when I didn't lose my job during COVID. I got lucky when I didn't get life-alteringly ill in the past 5 years. I am really lucky that I don't have some sort of pre-existing condition that has a really expensive monthly prescription. I'm really lucky that I can afford to adhere to the 50-30-20 rule, which is kind of a joke to many people in my generation. The 50-30-20 rule is essentially a rule of thumb, which dictates that of your income, 50% should be dedicated to expenses or needs like gas, food, rent. 30% of your income should be dictated towards wants, so discretionary income like skis or something like that. 20% of your income should go towards saving or the future, retirement, something like that. This was a rule of thumb and was pretty easy to follow back in the day, but now with rent being so expensive, a lot of people in my generation find that rent is 50% of their income. You know, when 60% of your income goes towards needs, and that's if you're being frugal, it can make a rule like the 50-30-20 rule feel pretty silly. The longer I live, the more I realize that every year I go without getting life-alteringly ill or in some sort of accident is an insane financial advantage. Like, we're all out here and we just kind of pretend we don't drive these expensive death machines around every day. If you roll the dice and you have a commute, something's gonna happen eventually, and it's more than likely that that's gonna financially mess up your life if you survive. And then my hobbies are skiing and climbing, which are notorious for their safety. And I think it's interesting that a lot of my friends who are skiers and or climbers are less afraid of getting hurt and more afraid of the financial repercussions of getting hurt. Like, if I break my arm, I know I'm gonna be okay, but what's that hospital bill gonna look like? I guess at the end of the day, if you're not lucky enough to have parents who can afford to pay for your college, then you're gonna need to, in turn, get really lucky to be able to afford your student loans. And in the age of stagnating wages, rising rent, and inflating prices, I can really understand why it feels kind of pointless to a lot of people. All right, guys, today is day 36 of trying to monetize my cats. They lie around and look cute and sleep, but they don't really do much other than that, so I figured it was time for them to start pulling their weight. Today I tried to teach Beef how to do taxes. It didn't really go well. She just kind of ate the pen that she was supposed to use to fill out my tax returns. So if you guys have any tips or tricks about monetizing your cats, please leave them in the comments. Also, thank you for 200. I really appreciate it. And remember to like, comment, share, subscribe, all that jazz. Love you guys. All right, if you've made it this far, I applaud you and also give you my thanks. If you're thinking of going to college, here are some things that I might do differently if I got the chance to do it again. First off, if you're thinking about going to a college in which you might have to take on some student loans, maybe don't. When I had narrowed down my college search to 2 options, the school I went to or my state school, my parents sat me down and had a little bit of a financial talk with me. They basically said, this is the amount we have saved up for you, and if you go to this private school, you will end up with $20,000 to $30,000 worth of student debt by the end, and if you go to this state school, we can buy you a car with the leftover money. I chose the debt, and I don't regret that, but I'm not gonna lie, that's like 50% true and 50% cope. Like, yes, going to this school kicked off the chain reaction that led to me meeting some of my best friends and moving to Wyoming and living my best Wyoming life. But I do think that if I had gone to the state school, I would have been okay. There would have been some direct benefits, like I would have been able to join an outing club instead of having to start a climbing club from scratch at my yuppie city school. I would have had a good time, I would have learned and gotten a good degree, and I wouldn't have had to dedicate the last 4.5 years of my life to paying off my student loans. I guess at the end of the day, I'm just saying, don't sleep on state schools. I kind of wish I hadn't. I can't change the past, so I'm not going to fixate on what I can and can't change. But I think if I knew what I know now, I probably would have gone to the state school instead. My next recommendation would be to try and conceptualize exactly how much it is you're going to owe in a way that you can understand. I didn't understand what like 20,000 meant for me, but then when I broke it down and found out what my monthly payment was going to be, my 17-year-old brain could like grasp that, and I would recommend doing that for yourself too. There are a lot of great resources out there that you should take advantage of. There's student debt calculators on the internet. You can plug in the principal and the interest rate, and you will see how much your monthly payment is going to be. And I think that takes a lot of the work out of it for you, and you can hopefully conceptualize what you're going to have to pay. I think a smaller payment gives you a little bit more flexibility. Let's say you have two different students, one of whom has a $250 minimum payment and the other has a $500 minimum payment. So let's say student A with a $250 minimum payment pays $400 a month. Student B can only afford $500 a month on top of everything else, so that's what they pay. If they both lose their job, student A just has a little bit more flexibility because they can just ramp down what they're paying and just pay the minimum, which is $250 a month, until they get their feet back underneath them. Student B is already going to have a bit more of a tight squeeze just because their minimum payment is $500 a month and it is inflexible. I think trying to give yourself as much flexibility as possible and what is, for all intents and purposes, a 10-year commitment is just setting yourself up for success. So if you can do that, try and do that. Tip number 3, let's say you get accepted to your dream school and you get the offer letter, which includes the financial aid you're going to receive from that institution. Private educational institutions are designed to make money, and that is something you should keep in mind for your entire 4, 3, 6-year journey at this institution. When I got my offer letter from my school, I had a need-based grant, which ended up being about $20,000 a semester, which was pretty huge, pretty exciting. I remember crunching the numbers, and I had kind of set an arbitrary limit of what my student loans were going to be, and if it exceeded that limit, then I was going to say no. But with this need-based grant, it was well under that limit, and I was really excited. Assuming this need-based grant stayed the same, then I would have been able to graduate with about $20,000 in debt, and I thought that was doable. My second year at school, nothing had really changed on my side, but my need-based grant was decreased by, I want to say, $2,000 a semester. $4,000 total, not the biggest deal. It wasn't crazy, but I was a little bit frustrated. Third year of college, I became a resident assistant and I got free housing as a result of that. Lo and behold, my need-based grant got decreased by the exact amount I was saving on free housing. I was pretty peeved by that because it just removed the financial incentive of being a resident assistant. I tried to appeal it, it was denied. And then my final year as a student, over the course of those 4 years, my need-based grant had dropped to about $12,000 a semester from the $20,000 I was initially getting when I went to school. That's where I ended up being closer to $26,000 in student debt as opposed to the $20,000 I had planned on graduating with. What's the point of this whole anecdote? Upon talking to a lot of my peers, I've realized that my story is not unique. I know a lot of folks who got a really high scholarship or need-based scholarship when they got accepted to school, and then over the course of the 4 years, that scholarship was whittled down or taken away completely. If you're going to a private institution, it behooves you to keep in mind that their goal is to make money. They're a for-profit institution. There's nothing keeping them from having that be their primary incentive when doing these sorts of things. Oftentimes, once they get you on the hook, they have a lot less incentive to keep you on the hook because they know the cost of switching institutions oftentimes outweighs the benefits. Cool. Let's bring that a little lower. Yeah. Okay, so let's say it's too late for you. You already have student loans. I wasn't able to get to you in time. I'm sorry, but this part of the video is for you. So the first thing you should consider if you already have student loans and you feel like they're kind of hard to keep up with, you should check out the new income-based repayment plan. If there was one good thing that Joey Brandoni managed to do, it was a complete overhaul of the income-based repayment plan. This new plan is called the SAVE plan, and it differs from other income-based repayment plans in a few different ways. And you can read all about them, you big nerd. I'm not going to go over all of them. The one that really caught my attention, however, is under the SAVE plan, if you make qualifying payments, then the interest doesn't accrue. Or rather, it accrues, but the government covers it for you. This is huge. One of the biggest qualms I have with the way the US government does student loans is the fact that interest can kill people. Like there are people with 6-figure student debt that graduate or don't finish school and end up with $1 million worth of debt in under 5 or 6 years. Granted, those are the most drastic cases, but I digress. Under the new SAVE income-based repayment plan, your payment will fluctuate with your income. Surprise, surprise. But the fact that you don't have to pay interest as long as you're making your qualifying payments, I think is insane. So for those of you who do have student loans, you should look into this like yesterday and see if you qualify. Let's say you don't qualify for the SAVE income-based repayment plan. Before we proceed, I have a question for you. Hey guys, it's Editor Garrett. I just wanted to make a quick note before I continue in the video that you're currently watching. I'm about to break it down into a unnecessarily black and white binary. I make a core assumption with the question I'm about to ask, and the assumption that I make is that you have the means to pay your loans. There are a lot of people out there who have insanely high minimum payments or were put into a situation where they have student loans against their will. And because student loans are one of few things, I think one of the only things, but don't quote me on that you can't get rid of by declaring bankruptcy, student loans can be particularly noxious and kind of hard to get rid of. So if it is all that you can do to make your minimum payment, I want you to exempt yourself from the following binary I'm about to create. That said, if you do have student loans and you are able to pay them, both your minimum or higher than your minimum, you should listen to the following section. All right, let me tee myself up now. With that disclaimer out of the way, let me ask you this. How quickly are you trying to pay off your student loans? If you answer, I don't really care, then just pay the minimum amount. It is really important that you pay the minimum amount because otherwise it could negatively affect your credit score. So just meet your minimum payment, get used to the idea that you're going to pay interest and that your principal isn't the amount you're going to actually pay. It's your principal plus your total interest, and just do what you got to do. If you answered, I would like to pay off my student loans ASAP, sir, then I would personally pay as much over the minimum monthly payment as is financially sustainable. I don't mean dumping your savings into your student loans. I don't mean dumping your emergency fund into your student loans. I don't mean dumping every single paycheck into your student loans. Whatever your minimum payment is, be it $50, $100, $200, $600 a month, try and pay as much over that as is financially sustainable. $10, $50, $100, whatever you think you can swing without going financially destitute is what you should probably do. That $10 a month could add up and could chop a year off of your 10-year term. Similarly, if you're paying $100, $200 over your minimum payment, then you could see yourself paying it off in as quick as 4, 5, 6 years. Of course, you should have your bases covered. If you're wondering whether or not you should be paying more than your minimum payment for student loans, you should check out the Money Dudes. They have this cool sheet called the Financial Order of Operations, or the FOO, as they like to call it, and it basically is like PEMDAS for where you should put your money. Assuming you don't have any bad credit card debt or anything else that requires your immediate attention, then you can work your way through their checklist and see if, this extra money should go towards your student loans. Now, keep in mind, with interest rates being what they are right now, if you were like me and you have closer to 3 or 4% interest, then there could be some merit to putting the extra money that you might put towards your student loans towards things like a Roth IRA. I think you should contribute to your Roth IRA and pay off your student loans if possible. They're not mutually exclusive. Personally, I like to think that the faster I paid off my student loans, the more money I kept from going to the government unnecessarily. And who doesn't love keeping money from the government? Do not lie on your taxes. The sooner you pay off your student loans, the sooner that money can go towards something you actually give a shit about. Whether it be buying really big, ugly boots, or holographic Charizard cards, or starting your stupid, dumb YouTube channel. I don't know. World's your oyster. What matters is it's something you choose and you care about it. I know we covered a lot here today, and I'm sorry for that. I guess I had a lot I wanted to say. I paid off my student loans like 2 months ago, and I think I still just have a lot of feelings and emotions about the whole thing. I also think I just wanted to get this out there before my feelings fade into a distant memory, because this is a really big problem and it affects a lot of people in this country. I just want to put a big disclaimer out there. Not only was none of this financial advice, but this was all through the lens of someone who, before they were even 17, decided that they wanted to pay off their student loans as fast as possible. For me, I wanted to get them done so I could move on with my life, but for a lot of folks, that might not be the best course of action. You don't have to put your life on pause in order to pay off your loans. I put off a lot of projects, trips, and other expenses, all for the sake of achieving this, and now that I have, I think I'm going to have to reteach myself how to spend money on things that don't have an inherent ROI, like a vacation. Just because that's how I did it doesn't mean that's the best way to do it. So take everything I say with a grain of salt. All right, last thing. Mr. Biden. Joey, my guy. I just want to express my sincere disappointment that the student loan forgiveness did not go through. I would have been freaking ecstatic if $10,000 had been taken off my student debt. And you know what? I promise you, it would have gone right back into the economy in one way or another, whether it was repairing my existing car or buying another one. I don't know. It would have gone and it would have helped. But I know that the student loan forgiveness wasn't for people like me. I was okay one way or another. I didn't end up needing the student loan forgiveness. There are a lot of people out there who do need it. They're buried in debt, and a $10,000 knock off their principal would have resulted in a fairly substantial decrease in their monthly payment. And when 60% of Americans are just scraping by, I think that would have been substantial. So, Again, disappointed, but I guess not surprised. Forgiveness or no, I think I kind of wanted to create a little bit of a time capsule in just how bad things are right now and relay my personal experience to it. I know I am not a monolith and my experience does not represent everyone else's experience, and there's a lot of people who are in way worse straits than I am. I hope it can help some people out there, but at the end of the day, I do think it's going to keep getting worse. I think 17-year-olds are going to keep getting suckered into having tens of thousands of dollars worth of debt. And I don't know if there's much I can do to stop that, but if this video helps someone make a better choice, or at least a more informed choice, then I think that's a success. So with that, I would like to thank you for watching. Talk to your friends about your finances, talk to your coworkers about how much you all get paid, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks. Also, if we could just teach some personal finance at a high school level, that would be great. Thanks.